footsteps echoing through the narrow streets of Florence, a city full of intrigue in the background. At a time when power struggles turned into a bloody chessboard, one man was shaping some of the most controversial ideas in history, Niccolò Machiavelli. His birthplace, Florence, was the heart of the Renaissance. Art, science, and politics were intertwined here. But beneath this brilliant cultural richness lay something else: chaos. An endless war raged between statesmen, families, churches, and kingdoms. Machiavelli was born in the midst of this confusion. His father was a lawyer, but his family was not among the most powerful in the city. A religious mother on the one hand, a questioning father on the other. Perhaps this family structure had a role in Machiavelli's later development of such harsh ideas on morality and power. He received a good education in his youth. He read the great philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome. But over time, he realized that the ideal worlds described in books had nothing to do with the real world. The real world was ruthless. Leaders either won or perished. In 1494, Florence suffered a great upheaval. In a popular uprising, the Medici family, who had ruled the city for many years, was overthrown. The newly established Republic of Florence offered an opportunity to the young Machiavelli. At the age of 29, he was appointed to one of the most important diplomatic posts in the state. This task brought Machiavelli face to face with the most powerful names in Europe: popes, princes, warlords. He negotiated and strategized with all of them. But the fate of Florence was not in his hands. He was just a diplomat and counselor. The city was weak against the great powers of Europe. In 1512, the Medici family returned with Spanish support. The Republic collapsed and Machiavelli was accused of treason. He was imprisoned and tortured. He tried to prove himself to the new government, hoping to regain his former power. But his past actions were not forgotten. He was sent into exile. In these years of disgrace, Machiavelli began to write perhaps the most controversial book of all time, Atan the Prince. In this book, he described the most ruthless ways of gaining and maintaining power. He said that a strong leader should not be merciful, that morality is important only as long as it works, that if a choice has to be made, it is safer to be feared rather than loved. But was Machiavelli really a tyrant? Or was he just a man explaining how the world really works? To understand this, we need to take a closer look at Machiavelli's political philosophy, The Prince, and Machiavelli's philosophy of power. Machiavelli's political philosophy has made him one of the most misunderstood figures in history. Most people only see him as a man who said, all means are necessary for power. But the truth is much more complex than that. When he wrote The Prince, Machiavelli was not saying that morality should be completely abandoned, but he argued that a leader could not survive simply by being good. In his eyes, politics was a game like chess. The winners in this game were not those who succumbed to their emotions, but those who turned the rules in their favor. His first rule was clear: power is independent of morality. It is good for a ruler to be virtuous, but if this virtue weakens him, he must give it up. Because history is full of leaders who are remembered not for being good, but for being strong. The second rule was that a leader must maintain his power at all costs. According to Machiavelli, a ruler might want to be loved by his people, but he should primarily be feared. Love was temporary, fear was permanent, because people were selfish by nature. If a leader made a mistake, those who loved him could easily turn away, but those who feared him would not dare betray him. The third, and perhaps the most controversial rule: leaders should lie and deceive when necessary. People want to see leaders who are honest and trustworthy, but in the real world, honesty doesn't always pay off. Instead of saying, a ruler must be true to his word, Machiavelli said, he must appear to be true. What the people thought was important, but they should never know what was really going on. One of the most striking examples of these ideas was hidden in a name Machiavelli admired: Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia and Machiavelli's understanding of the perfect leader. In Machiavelli's eyes, Cesare Borgia was the embodiment of a perfect leader. Borgia was the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI, and a ruthless figure who played every political game to establish his own state in Italy. Borgia's greatest talent was that he knew how to gain and maintain power. Machiavelli held him up as an example of how a leader must be ruthless but wise. Borgia was unquestionably cruel to his enemies. For example, when he conquered the Romagna region, he appointed his deputy Ramiro de Lorqua to control the population. De Lorqua used massacres and severe punishments to bring the people to their knees. But Borgia did not want the anger of the people to be directed against him. So one morning, he had Ramiro de Lorqua's mutilated corpse displayed in the town square. The people were horrified but also relieved. They believed their new ruler had brought justice. In reality, however, Borgia had first used a tyrant, then scapegoated him and won the confidence of the people. Machiavelli saw this move of Borgia as a perfect strategy. According to him, if a leader had to use violence, he had to do it quickly and decisively, and then establish a permanent order by winning the love of the people. Borgia's strategies taught Machiavelli another lesson. You must choose your enemies as carefully as your friends and never underestimate them. But one of Machiavelli's most controversial views on politics was his answer to the question of whether it is better to be loved or feared. Machiavelli's views on human nature. One of Machiavelli's most famous questions, is it better to be loved or feared? This has been debated for centuries. Should a ruler win the love of his people, or should he instill fear in them? Machiavelli gives a very clear answer here. If both are possible, great, but if you have to choose, it is always safer to be feared. A government based on love depends on the loyalty of the people. But people are selfish by nature. The moment you go against their interests, they abandon you. Fear, on the other hand, is a human instinct. If a leader has the luxury of making mistakes, the people's love for him can disappear in an instant. But fear, that's much more enduring. Of course, Machiavelli would never want a leader to be hated. There's a fine line between being feared and being hated. If the people hate their leader, they will eventually mobilize to overthrow him. Therefore, a leader must be cruel when necessary, but his cruelty must be planned and calculated, swift, precise, and necessary, but never arbitrary. One of the examples he gives here is the fall of Caesar. Caesar was loved by his people, but he was assassinated because he was not feared by the Senate, whereas rulers like Borgia were able to survive for a long time by establishing an authority balanced by fear. At this point, we move on to another critical view of Machiavelli. A true leader must know how to lie when necessary. According to Machiavelli, honesty may be a virtue, but it is not a necessity for someone who wants to have power. On the contrary, a leader should know how to lie when necessary and be able to manipulate people's perceptions. A ruler must appear trustworthy, fair, and virtuous, but in reality, he must be ready to do whatever it takes. Because in the real world, not everyone is honest. If your rivals are lying, it is only a weakness for you to remain completely honest. Machiavelli uses a metaphor here. The leader must be both a lion and a fox. The lion represents strength. Courage and strength are necessary to crush your enemies. But just being a lion is not enough. A strong but stupid leader can be deceived by his more intelligent enemies. That is why a leader must also be cunning like a fox. He must anticipate traps, understand the weaknesses of human nature, and know how to deceive when necessary. As an example, let us recall how Cesare Borgia, whom Machiavelli admired, wasted his loyal man Ramiro de Lorqua. Borgia first subdued the people with his tyrannical rule, and then gained their trust by eliminating him. In the same way, a leader must sometimes play the role that people want to see. But there is a limit to this manipulation. A leader should never become a hated person. People do not have to like their leader, but if they harbor anger and hatred towards him, they will eventually find a way to overthrow him. Machiavelli sets a clear rule here. Betray, but don't be betrayed. Be strong, but don't let anyone see your true colors. All these ideas are linked to one of his most famous concepts, fortuna and virtù. According to Machiavelli, a successful leader does not win only by his intelligence and strategy. The factor of luck is also important, but the real issue is how you manage this luck. According to Machiavelli, there are two fundamental forces that determine the success of a ruler: fortuna and virtù. Fortuna, or luck, represents the uncontrollable chaos of life. Sometimes you're in the right place at the right time and you win. Other times, no matter what you do, the world is against you. Wars, epidemics, betrayals, these are things that are out of a leader's hands. But that's where the trick comes in, virtù. It would be wrong to translate this word as virtue, because virtù is not a moral virtue, but a concept that encompasses leadership skills such as will, courage, cunning, and determination. Machiavelli says that fortuna is only 50% effective, while the remaining 50% depends on virtù. So if fortune is a wave, virtù is knowing how to surf it. A leader must accept the world as it is, not as he imagines it to be. He must be prepared for fortuna's blows, mold his plans accordingly, and not hesitate in the face of opportunities. Because when luck knocks, those who are not prepared can only stare. One of the greatest examples of this is Louis XIV's strengthening of France with his absolutist rule, and Napoleon's rise to empire by seizing opportunities. Both recognized fortuna, but turned it in their favor with their virtù. But not every leader can strike this balance. In Machiavelli's eyes, history is the graveyard of leaders who failed to seize opportunities. At this point, we come to perhaps Machiavelli's most crucial message. You should not think about how the world should be, but how the world works. This is where Machiavelli's ethics breaks away from traditional thinking. Instead of imagining ideal worlds, it focuses on the question of how to succeed in the real world. Machiavelli's modern world views. From the 16th century until today, Machiavelli's ideas have continued to leave their mark in every field, from politics to business and even popular culture. His harsh, realistic, and sometimes ruthless advice is like the secret guide of many leaders and strategists even today. In the modern world, Machiavellism is not limited to politics. His answers to the question, how to maintain power, are effective in many areas, from CEOs in the business world to marketing strategies and even our personal relationships. Machiavelli in politics. Today, most world leaders apply Machiavelli's teachings consciously or unconsciously, directing the masses in election campaigns, forming strategic alliances, managing the fears of the people in times of crisis. These are all modern versions of the art of leadership described by Machiavelli. When Winston Churchill said, "Politics is the art of foresight and the art of saying things that will turn out to be true later," he was actually expressing a truth that Machiavelli put forward. Machiavelli in business, running a company requires as much strategy as running a state. Steve Jobs' strategy of outsmarting his competitors, Jeff Bezos' aggressive tactics in establishing market dominance, these are exactly in line with Machiavelli's answers to the question of how to gain and retain power. In today's corporate world, the rule of create a strong image but do not reveal your real plans to anyone is the secret formula behind the success of many CEOs. Machiavelli in popular culture. It's easy to see Machiavellist characters in TV series and films. Tywin Lannister of Game of Thrones, Frank Underwood of House of Cards, Vito Corleone of The Godfather. All of these characters are the kind of leaders Machiavelli talks about in The Prince, cold-blooded rulers who put emotion aside and act with power and strategy. But Machiavelli's message should not be misunderstood. He was not advocating immorality. He was only saying, the world is not what you think it is, act accordingly. According to him, to be successful in life, it is not enough to be good. You have to be strong, you have to be smart, and you have to be able to take tough decisions when necessary. What about us? What can we learn from this philosophy today? What lessons can we learn from Machiavelli to survive in the real world? Machiavelli's philosophy applies not only to leaders and managers, but also to individual life. Whether you want to rise in your career or manage your relationships, Machiavelli's teachings can make you stronger and more strategic in life. Summarized in 5 points. 1. Accept the world as it is, not as it should be. It is nice to imagine ideal worlds, but that is not how things work in the real world. Look at what people do, not what they say. Most people praise honesty, but are not afraid to lie for their own benefit. Therefore, it is important to recognize that being naively good does not always pay off. 2. Loved or feared? This is a valid question not only for managers, but also in everyday life. It is important to build good relationships with people, but you should not lose your authority. If you try to win everyone's love, people will start to underestimate you. If you don't draw boundaries to protect yourself, people will try to make you do what they want. As Machiavelli said, if it is possible to be loved, great. But if you have to choose, it is safer to be feared. 3. The source of true power lies in managing what you can control. Fortune is a part of life, but successful people don't rely on luck. They make their own preparations. Your power lies not only in controlling the outside world, but also in controlling yourself. Take control of your own life. The one who is prepared is the one who survives a crisis. 4. You cannot survive without knowing how to play, whether at work or in your social circle. Human relations are like chess. If you don't know the rules, others can easily manipulate you. Act strategically, not emotionally. Understand people's weaknesses, motivations, and true intentions. Be cunning like a fox and strong like a lion when necessary. 5. Real power is to control how you look from the outside. One of Machiavelli's greatest lessons is, it is not how you are, but how you appear. People don't always know their leaders intimately. They only see the message they give to the outside world. Create an effective image, but only you know your true intentions. Conclusion. Machiavelli's teachings still apply. Pure goodness does not always win in life, but being strong and smart always pays off. The person who learns to play games, thinks strategically, and accepts the world as it is always has the advantage. Are Machiavelli's words a guide or a warning? How far do you have to go to win in the real world? Will you set the rules of the game, or will you play by the rules set by others? Your answer to this question will determine who you are. Do you think Machiavelli was right? If you advocate his methods, put power wins in the comments. But if you think honesty wins, put virtue wins. Let's see what people think. And if you want more content like this, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the real world is shaped by those who act, not just those who watch.